long, so he's got to give me a heads up in 45 minutes. I'll barely have said my name good in 45 minutes. I'm also a pastor, so, get you going, and in conclusion doesn't really mean an in conclusion. So. But we'll stop when the time comes on that. Yes, I want to talk about chaplaincy to the law enforcement tonight, and oftentimes, I've read the book y'all got, by the way. I bought that book, and I happened to be talking to Mike today. It came into his house, and I saw it, and I said, I want that. So I read it, and it's really good. The guy, this is topsoil, and she didn't have enough room in the book. It's topsoil for law enforcement chaplaincy. So I'm gonna hit into tell some stories tonight. We're gonna talk about some of them a little bit. We're gonna talk about the officer himself, his family a little bit, what to expect when a person does become a chaplain. Law enforcement officer, because it's not like any other chaplaincy there is. It really isn't. I was, just to give you a background myself, I was a law enforcement officer in 1972 in Cocoa, Florida, and moved up here in 1980 to Pensacola. Stayed here and was a detective for at least 3 of those 5 years I spent anyway at Pensacola PD. And then I left Pensacola PD, opened my own private investigation business. And right in the middle of that, God called me into ministry. How would you like to have a pastor that's also a private eye? Oh, man. I just told him, I think, you think you get away with stuff. But anyway, wound up down in Cocoa, Florida, in Thibodaux, Louisiana. And I spent from 1995 to 2014 as a pastor of a church there. I was also a reserve officer, deputy sheriff there, and their chaplain. In 2014, God began to lead me to go full-time as a chaplain with the sheriff's department there. And so I put them together a complete chaplaincy program, I guess you could say. And then I left there in 2019 and moved here. And so I've been kind of retired, but I don't like retirement. But so we're trying to get a chaplaincy program started at Pensacola PD. And we're working on it. We're actually up there. The chief's got everything, policy procedures and stuff like that, but we just got to get it all finalized and stuff like that. Chaplaincy, what do y'all, kind of like this to be a little bit more interactive. I could talk all night long on it, but y'all will get more out of it. It's a little bit more interactive. So what do you think, if you were to give a definition of the word chaplaincy, and you probably already have done that, what would you say it is? Your definition,
Support.
not somebody else's, huh?
Support.
Support, okay.
And immediate care.
Immediate care. All right.
Information for support, like in a crisis, being able to help give support and information on where you should go.
Things that they don't know,
Mhm.
yeah, and that's very good, because without that, and we're gonna talk about, Mike just told me y'all have done death notification, but death notification is a real deep topic. I'm gonna hit on that a little bit tonight as part of the job of the chaplain of law enforcement, because in most cases, when there's death notification to be made, the department would like for the chaplain to be there. Sometimes the officer will ask the chaplain to speak, and sometimes he say, I'll do the talking. But you've got to know what to expect when you go there. So we're going to touch on that just a little bit tonight as well. But chaplaincy, I will just give you my definition of it, and that's just, just as good as anybody else's. But it's ministry with your hands and feet. You got to be there. You just can't do chaplaincy from a distance. You got to be there. So in the process of doing law enforcement chaplaincy, you got to realize that, hey, I'm going with this chaplain, and I'm going to, as a chaplain, I'm going with this department, and I'm going to minister to law enforcement personnel. Now, that's not only means the officers that ride the street, that means your detectives, that means your vice agents, that means your dispatchers, that means your clerical people, all of them, because they're all in that. They're seeing a side of life, guys, that nobody else sees. They're seeing it not once, but they see it lots and lots. And unfortunately, you cannot, I tell them like this, it's like scratching the underside, the underbelly of a snake. You can't do that without getting muck and mud on you. You just can't. It's going to happen. And these officers, no matter who they are, no matter what kind of person they are, they're living in the underworld of society out there. That's who they deal with. Most law enforcement officers don't think very highly of ministers. And the reason for it is there's been too many ministers that's done what with kids. That's who they see. That's their world. It's not ours, but it's their world. Boy Scout leaders, for an example. We think Boy Scout, that's a guy who's given of himself and his time and effort to help kids. They see a perpetrator there, It happens because it happens so much to them. So, when we talk about law enforcement officers, let's think first about the officer himself. He does two things in a one-day period of time. Puts his uniform on, or his gun, just depending on, of course, if he's wearing a uniform, gun goes with it, but maybe plain clothes or whatever, he puts his gun on, badge, and he goes to work. He has to immediately go into what we call hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is that sensation of going into something that's exciting but yet dangerous. Mountain climbers have that, or people who scale things and stuff like that. It's all over the place, but the problem is they do it every day. Now they do that all day long. They do a traffic stop. Well, it may be Granny, but she just, she didn't know her tag was expired. It's been expired for 3 months. She didn't pay no attention to it. He goes up to her and sees this Granny, it's real nice, but it could be Ma Baker with a sawed-off gun too, shotgun. He doesn't know until he gets there to see. And even then, when he gets there to see, sometimes it's not real. You have people that all the time, what are you stopping me for? Well, you got this, immediately a confrontation. He was just going to warn them, don't run the stop sign next time, just slow down. But now this guy put them on there, this guy getting a ticket. The pen really is mightier than the sword. Right. Okay, that's where you want to go, we'll go ahead and write this ticket. But he does that all day long. He goes to a disturbance of some kind. Let's just say it's somebody that's a homeless person that tried to eject from a local store somewhere and they won't go. Well, he's got to go take that person out. That person stinks to high heaven, but he ain't going on his own, so the officer has to grab him. He has to handcuff him. Everybody's standing around him. What are they doing nowadays that they didn't used to do? Video. It's immediately video goes up on there. So he's in and out of that. And if you're a chaplain, you're with him or her. You're with them. So as you go into these things, you've got to stand with them and recognize my job is not to apprehend. That's the officer's job, but my job is to watch out for that officer. Because when he gets back in the car, he may very well have lost it, be mad. And why? Because he didn't do anything to cause that. Just the situation happened that way. So you're riding with an officer, and he gets angry about that. I think one of the worst things a chaplain could do is try to dispel that anger. Remember, he's hypervigilant. He's had that all day long. He's still got that going, and he goes from one call to the next. Just let him rant and rave. Guys, that's the hardest thing in the world to do. I know that oftentimes law enforcement will test their chaplains. They'll test them, they'll say something that they tell them you don't tell nobody else. And then they'll wait to see if you told anybody else. And because it'll get around. And if you ever let that confidentiality go, you won't never be with them again on that. So you got those things with all those things happening at one time is what I'm trying to point out. So much of that going on. But now that officer goes home that afternoon, and he's been making decision after decision after decision. And he has to be in charge wherever he goes. All right. You go home that afternoon, he has not had to be in charge at all yet. But you've watched him do that. You go, wow, I'm tired. So you go in and rest a little bit. But he goes home and his wife says, honey, we take out the garbage? Let Johnny take out the garbage, I'm tired. Well, Johnny's not here. Well, he'll be here after a while. Let him take out the garbage. Now that's coming home, y'all. What you see what's beginning to happen in his family? Those kind of things escalate day after day after day, month after month, year after year. Why do you think law enforcement officers have so many divorces? I'm in charge, but I need a rest. Because now he's gone from hypervigilance to hypovigilance. Do you know how long it takes for hypovigilance? Well, let me rephrase that. Do you know how long it takes for hypervigilance to go away so now that you have hypovigilance? 8 to 12 hours.
Yeah.
What's the officer doing in the next 8 to 12 hours? Going back to work. Hypervigilance. I remember reading a story, I may have been in that book there, I don't remember, I don't think it was, some book I read here not long ago. An officer was riding with her family on vacation, they were in another state somewhere. And the officer and his wife was in the car, and her mom and dad was in the car. The officer and his wife's in the back seat, her mom and dad was driving the car, and mom said something about, well, that's a nice looking bicycle that man has. And the officer says, yeah, somebody else don't have it now. I said, can't you ever say anything nice? He deals with that day in and day out. How do you think a chaplain can help somebody in that kind of situation? Anybody got any ideas? I mean, they've been done law since, say, 10, 15 years. You're riding with them. They know the streets. How do you help somebody like that as a chaplain? He doesn't really need any information,
Sometimes just listening.
always just listen.
Ministry of presence.
Yep.
Yes, that is the very best thing you do, minister of presence. They need somebody to listen. And when they say things, don't be surprised at what they say. Remember, coarse humor for law enforcement sometimes is real coarse, but that beats the heck out of them crying and getting mad and angry and upset. Also, maybe they worked a traffic accident and there's a little girl in it. Let me just give you an example of one that happened to me one time. A truck ran off, and I was down in South Louisiana, a truck ran off in the bayou. And they were trying to get people out of there. In the front seat, they had a man and older man and his son, 19 years old, in the passenger seat. And they were trying to get them out before the truck sank all the way in the bayou, and they had gotten there to him. It was law enforcement as well as some firemen that was there, jumped in there real quick. Trying to get him out, and the first guy through there moved a baby seat over to the side so he could get to the 19-year-old and get him out. They were moving him out, and somebody said something, and he looked, said, "There's a baby in there," and he goes, "Where's it?" And then it dawns on him that baby seat he had, a 2-year-old that he had not seen. He just moving stuff, moved that 2-year-old to the side, tried to get the 2-year-old, and then passed the 2-year-old back, person after person, to get him from the bayou all the way up on some land. Of course, the baby was dead, nothing they could do. How does that affect somebody like that? Well, 3 days later, I met with the entire group and did a deep interview with them. And I'll never forget what one of the men said. A lot of them said stuff that was very important. I'll never forget what he said. Sometimes it's almost hard not to cry. Because the guy was so spot on. He's sitting there and he says, "You know," he said, "I went home that night." He said, "I had a 3-year-old home." He says, "And when he talks about playing Legos, I realize it's not at all about playing Legos. Just spending time with my kid." Now think about this a minute. They go through this again and again and again. And the EMT lady, poor thing, she rushed to a call for an infant, less than 6 months old, about 3 or 4 months old. That unfortunately, when they got there, mom was a druggie and she had rolled over on the baby, and that's how the baby had died. But she's trying to get life into it. She takes the baby, puts it in the ambulance, rushes to the hospital with it, and the doctor says, "You're bringing dead babies to the hospital now?" Her 7-year-old son had drowned the year before in a swimming pool. And she's thinking about that baby, her 7-year-old son. The next weekend, she goes to a baby that is dead, SIDS. She doesn't take that baby to the hospital now, but she sits there and just holds that baby in her arms. What do you do to help people who are hurting like that? That's not the normal hurt, but she's an EMT. This is not, I don't know how many more times it happened, 2 weekends in a row. I mean, we spent a little time together because she just needed to talk. And sometimes all you can do, and I like your word, just listen, because guys, there's nothing you can say that will help. But your presence does. They'll never forget that. You were right there with them. One of the things about law enforcement is this: they will not accept you until you've gone through some of the things they've gone through, because you don't know what they're going through. They may have a pastor, and he's a great guy, but until he's been in what they've been in, he's not going to really understand what that causes in life. So when you think about that a little bit, you think about these people that are hurting. Chaplaincy is a desperate need for these guys. Number one, you know that they want to do the right thing. I've never seen one yet that didn't tell me when he started law enforcement, I wanted to help. I wanted to make things right. But 2 years into it, he's just going along. 10 years into it, they're counting the months and the days until they no longer have to be a law enforcement officer. So, you know, all these things build up, and they don't forget those things, because just about all your officers that are on the street now have little kids. And when something happens to a kid, a child, or a family, I never forget one day I had to make an arrest on Christmas Day. And a Christmas tree had been thrown out of the house in the front yard. 2 little kids, elementary school age, sitting over there. And Daddy's cursing up a storm and raising Cain, and we couldn't stop him from abusing his wife, so we made an arrest. Christmas Day, the little boy sitting over there just crying, and I'll never forget the sight of that little guy just sitting there crying, you know. How do you help people that way? You know, we know who Jesus is, and know what they don't. They don't. Now, I mean, all of them don't, but the majority of them don't. So what do you do with people that are hurting like that? You sit there and you listen. You let them say whatever they want to say, and you're right there with them. Another thing is too, if an officer, let me just throw out a situation to you, an officer stops a car and maybe it's a drunk driver, okay? You're sitting in the front seat, he said, just remain in the front seat, so that's where you sit. He gets out and he goes up there and he's having the guy do his field sobriety test and all stuff, and the guy fails it miserably, so he turns and tells him, all right, you're under arrest, and turns him around, well, the guy starts fighting. What do you do? That's a question to be answered.
Yeah,
What
we're
do you
trying to
do?
figure it out.
Help the officer.
Exactly.
I was gonna say.
Help the officer.
If you wanna stay a chaplain in that department, you do what you can.
Yeah, help the
Yeah.
officer.
Exactly. And this guy may just be sitting on that guy for a while, he put his handcuffs on.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, guys that don't want handcuffs on him, they're hard to put on, hard to put on. But when you realize that there are times when you put yourself in danger, you could get hurt being a chaplain with law enforcement. It's not a matter of always being there when there's other assistance, and most of the time there is other assistance, especially in the city situation. In the county, it's not as much, they may be out there for a while before somebody else shows up. But you're there with them, and he may not ask you, but he certainly expects you to help out in a situation like that. You know, there's all those things when you think about what they're going through day in and day out, it's kind of tough to think, do I really want this job as a chaplaincy for law enforcement? Because you begin to get in the same gutter they get into. You begin to see the same things they see and hear the same things they hear. Now, you're not having to write the reports and take the pictures and all that other stuff, but you're there with them. You know, sometimes you go to, I'll give you another example that happened down in Louisiana. I felt so sorry for the officers, and but they'll always tell you when you ask them how you doing, I'm good. That's just natural, I'm good. But a mom had a 5-year-old child in her house and had a divorce, and she and her 5-year-old child were gonna go be with her sister that had died or something. So she stuck the gun on top of the 5-year-old child and shot the child through to herself. One bullet hit both of them. So murder-suicide. Now, I think that's pretty bad. You go to the scene, you see that, okay? But you can't touch the child nor the mom. Or you can touch them, but you can't move them. Detectives have to come in. Then you have to have your coroners come in. Then you have to do all the measurements and all the stuff that goes along with that, because what if it wasn't a murder-suicide? You can't go back and redo something, so you have to do it then. So the officers that are standing there are measuring for this little 5-year-old, and they're measuring to the wall. They're doing their job. Yeah, they are hurting. They are hurting. And you know they're hurting. Nothing you can do. Occasionally, if you know them well, occasionally you can go stand by the officer, and he maybe just be standing in the doorway, put your hand on his shoulder, say, "But I want you," just let him know. You know, that's all you got to say. Nothing you can say to take away hurt like that. Those things do happen. They do happen. But then the other thing too, I told you I was going to touch base a little bit, Mike, on death notifications.
Mm-hmm.
When you're chaplain with law enforcement, you're going to spend way too many times doing death notifications. But death notifications are important. How you do them? I do a whole course in the academy on death notifications. How you do that, but I just want to give you guys some examples of some things that happen in death notifications. We walked into a house one time, 3 o'clock in the morning, myself and a uniformed officer, and the guy that had died worked on an offshore oil rig, and he died of a heart attack. And so we were going to tell the family about it. Well, I knock on the door. He was a black guy. I knock on the door. There's a white woman there, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure if I got the right house or not. May have, may not have, just don't know. So I had to ask her, "Ma'am, do you have a husband named so-and-so?" She said, "Yes, I do." She says, "Can we come in a minute?" Now this is 3 o'clock in the morning, uniformed officer and a chaplain standing there. You know something's not right. But you'd be surprised how many people don't pay attention that this is fixing to be this kind of it's just kind of, okay, come on in. So we come in and you always come in, you never give death notifications through the door. Never. A lot of different reasons for that we don't have time to go into tonight. But you walk in and you sit down with them. We walked in and we sat down with her. And his parents needed to be notified. Well, his mother, the man that had died, his mother was working as a sitter for somebody, and she had to get somebody to come relieve her, and then she was going to come to the house. You don't give death notifications on the telephone to immediate family. Cousins, brothers maybe, but not mother, father, sister, you know. So they were having her come over. By now it's almost 4 o'clock in the morning. The dad gets there, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, guys. I know better to do some things I do. But I'm thinking it's a dad. And he doesn't understand what's going on. By that time, several other relatives had arrived too. He's standing on one side of the couch, I'm standing on the other side of the couch, and he said, what's going on? And I said, well, your son, I called him by name, says he died of a heart attack on Rick. Boom, that guy hit the floor just like a rock. I mean, why didn't I have him sit down? Why didn't I tell him, like I teach it to be done? You know, you just get into situations sometimes and you don't pay enough attention to what's going on. I felt like an idiot. I run around over and get him. He was out like a light. But we brought him back to it and did something. Well, finally his mother shows up. One of the cousins that was there looked at me and said, sir, would you ask her to sit down? I said, yeah. I'll do my job right this time, buddy. You know, so we got her, and she handled him better than the dad did on that. One of the boys, good friend of his, I guess, friend, cousin, relative somewhere, was over there at night, and he was in his late teens, early 20s. He just went running down, I think it was a nephew, that's what it was. He went running down the road, and somebody else says, you need to go get him. Let him run. Let him run. Everybody handles grief differently, and his way, I just need to do something. Now, if he's punching a brick wall, stop him, because he's gonna hurt himself. But otherwise, let him grieve, let him scream and holler. I was with an officer one day in which a little 3-year-old had run out. They'd had a lot of rain. This guy lived on a kind of a hill, I guess, but with a little ravine behind it. And when it rained real hard, water flooded that place. And his mother was out there, and this is one of those things that I just little sidebar goes to this. Guys, when you're telling your children to stop, they better stop. Just chasing them as they laugh and run. It may be funny in the living room, but it ain't funny when it happens out there, because she couldn't get him to stop. He fell in that little water, and it just carried him off. So they finally found him in some trees down the road, and his heart beating a little bit, but not much. By the time they got him to the hospital, it wasn't beating at all. This man, his father, had the child that day. His boy's mother, the one that died, they're separated. They weren't married. They're now mad at each other and everything do. So one side of the hospital, I got one family, the other side of the hospital, I got another family. Trying to minister to both and the officers that go in between them. So you sit there, what do you do? So finally the doctor, after an hour of trying to revive the little boy, couldn't do it. Walk into the chapel, and the doctor comes in with me, and we tell the man that his son has passed, there's nothing we can do. He falls on the floor, beats on the floor, and cusses God for everything he can cuss God with. God took his son. That was just the worst thing that could have happened. God took his son. His sister came in hollering, no, give him something, just leave him alone. Let him grieve. That's what he was doing. About an hour or so later, after I'd gone back to the other side of the hospital and dealt with them some too, and she's mad at him because she thought she said he killed the child because she didn't pay attention to what he was doing, you know, those kind of things go on. But anyway, I walked with him, and he's going back to see his son for the last time before the morgue took him. And it just came to me, I said, this is a good thought. And I called the guy by name, and I said, let me tell you something. I said, God did not take your child. He looked at me like I was nuts. Like, what are you talking about? God didn't take my child. Yes, he did. I said, no. I said, we live in a sin-ridden world. I said, death is a result of sin, not of God. I said, result of sin. I said, but Jesus was there to receive your son. I said, I can just picture this. When he quit breathing and wasn't no longer alive here, Jesus was right there on his knees with his arms spread open, waiting for your son to run into his arms. Y'all all seen pictures like that. That's kind of painted that picture for him a little bit. And he kept me saying, you know, Chad, and boy, you could just see the change come over it. I went back the next week and checked on him at the house to see how he was doing. And his comment was, you know, he says, Sam, come on in, man. Things are good. They're going great. He was just a totally different guy than we'd seen before. Sometimes it's a matter of how things are presented. I don't know if that would work with somebody else or not, but it worked with him that time. And you know, when you think about it, the officers are going through stuff, and they go home, and I tell them, the last thing I say is, okay, go home and play with you. I call his kid by name if I know it, you know. Go home and play with Johnny, you know. He knows that I am, you know. But then what happened to the divorces? Once again, you got hypervigilance and hypovigilance. Hypervigilance is something we like. It's something that's exciting. We want to do it. When you guys are getting ready for a test, for example, you have a little bit of hypervigilance for getting ready to take that test. After the test is over, what do? You go either
Breathe a sigh of
lead or sigh of relief, or you know, talk about. But that's hypovigilance. You're coming down off of the hypervigilance. But the same thing happens to an officer, because he never knows what he's going to encounter moment after moment. I pulled up to a house, to a store one day, 7-Eleven. There was a guy standing there, 3 guys actually standing there by the used to have pay telephone back then.
Yeah.
Pay telephone, and I looked at them a minute, and they just looked at me, and I thought, well, okay, so I backed off and just pulled on out and went on somewhere else. I hadn't got more than 4 or 5 blocks down the road, a call came in, that store had been robbed by those 3 guys. Now, had I got out of my car and started anything, I may not have been here to tell you about it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I didn't know they had a gun, they were getting ready, and they were not backing up one little bit, they were just stood there. I was driving by one day and my wife was with me, and there was a guy standing, it's probably about wee hours in the morning, we were going somewhere, and a guy standing beside a Coke machine beside a building. I said, "You see anything wrong with that?" She said, "Nope." I said, "A police officer does." That guy standing there, why is he standing there by himself in that particular location? He said, "If I don't patrol, I'd have whipped in there and seen what was going on." Why? Hyper vigilance is what I'm pointing out. This, everything they see day in, day out.
Mhm.
They come home, that don't happen at home. It ain't good to go home and tell your wife you ain't gonna do what needs to be done for me. You gonna mow the yard this week? No, you can mow it, I'm tired. They do these things, why? Because, I'm tired, I'm bored. Well, these guys go home and they're bored, stiff. So where do they think they're gonna go if they don't go home?
No, they shouldn't.
Yep.
Or where they
And they're gonna
shouldn't.
go with other police officers. And then they're gonna do is they're gonna tell their war stories. It's one good thing that has helped me in my law enforcement chaplaincy is I have enough law enforcement experience that I can tell war stories with them. And that's all they want, just talk war stories. When you go home, mama does not know what he's put up with. And he don't want her to know. They got kids that are there, they don't need to be exposed to all this stuff. So he doesn't say anything to her, so he doesn't talk it out. Who can he talk it out with? The chaplain. If the chaplain's around.
Right.
So if you see your men once a month, you're not gonna do very much. You gotta spend time with them, you gotta ride with them, you gotta expose yourself to what they're being exposed to, and understand what's happening to them. Most officers do not realize the hypervigilance and the hypovigilance, they just don't. Well, they know it's there, but they couldn't put it into words as to what it is. So they say, well, I go home. Another reason why a lot of officers get divorced is because of hypervigilance of an affair. An affair causes that hypervigilance, so they keep that hypervigilance going even when they're off duty. Not that, some of these women are a lot uglier than their wives, and at the same time, they go here and there. Listen, they just need that hypervigilance. It's not looks and all that other stuff that causes that. It's the hypervigilance. Hypervigilance means a lot in law enforcement. Can't get away from it. It's there. It's there. Law enforcement is one of those activities that when a person becomes a law enforcement officer, it's not long before they lose their original friends. A guy becomes an insurance salesman. He makes more of his original friends because he wants to use them.
Mhm.
But law enforcement, why? Because Johnny was a good buddy and everything. I knew him well, did a high school group together, used to do this, used to do that. Johnny doesn't understand what I've gone through. Eric over here, he's been out there with me on the case. He knows what we've gone through. Remember that guy we took down last year? Talk about it. Hypervigilance. They lose those old friends that were there. I tell them all the time in the academy, I said, guys, you find a church and go to it. I said, I know y'all think, I'm the chaplain, I'm supposed to tell you that. I said, let me tell you. I said, you need to be reminded that there's a God up there. And then you need to be reminded there's a God who loves you. Because they can forget that out there, especially if they don't know Jesus. And they can absolutely forget that. And you gotta be able to tell them things like that. But another reason for that is you meet people all spectrums of this world in church. And in Sunday school times, you get to spend time with them, you go out to eat with them. They're not cops, you're not telling war stories. Hypervigilance is not there in that sense. So, when you look at what an officer goes through day in and day out, after he's been there 10, 15 years, if he's not doing something outside of law enforcement on a regular basis, he will become an embittered cop. Doesn't mean he's being impolite to you, it just means he's an embittered cop on that.
Scars.
Now, I threw out a whole bunch of stuff there, guys. Questions, comments? Yeah.
Answered a lot of my questions.
So my question is I would just thought to myself, let's say I go into chaplaincy, I just feel like I would get tongue-tied in those situations,
That's okay. Got nothing to say, that's just as good.
Yeah, but then I guess it's just me personally, I'm just I gotta say something, and so I think it's a personal thing I'm gonna have to get over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I feel like I need to fix it, how can I fix it? And so I've been trying that recently within the past couple of weeks, I'm in recovery ministry, and so a lot of these people come with a lot of these issues and a lot of these problems, and I found myself more or less just sitting there and being quiet and not trying to fix So anyways,
What's your name?
Hannah.
Hannah, most people know their problems.
Mhm.
That's why you don't have to tell somebody in the pulpit that they're a sinner. They know they're a sinner. So that's done deal. We know that. What they don't know is how to get out of it.
Mhm.
And oftentimes they just need a listening ear, and they'll talk themselves right out of it. They'll say, "Well, I know I need to do this," and you just, "Good point. Yes, you do." You let them bring it up, and that's a good way to do it. Same thing with police officers. Matter of fact, if you talk too much in a police car, one who's used to riding by himself, remember, you're in his office.
Yeah.
So whatever that's his place, not yours. You're just kind of a visitor there. But you're in his car, in his office. It may very well be that he just needs a little bit of quiet time. And if he's not talking much, no reason for you to say anything. Matter of fact, if you get to talking too much, Hannah, what he finds himself doing is telling you to be quiet, because he's trying to listen to the radio at the same time. And sometimes he just needs a little peace and quiet because of what he's been through. Contemplate things, yeah, exactly. He's ready to get ready to go home the last hour of the day. But 10 minutes before he gets off, there's a bad wreck. He goes to work, so he doesn't get off for 4 more hours. But he goes into work the same time as he would have next day. So, you had a question, you did.
When you were telling about the death notification and you had to wait for all of those relatives to get there, what we've learned in our book is that you're supposed to wait till everybody gets there. And so as you're telling that these people gotta come, these people gotta come, I'm thinking, what are you doing with the people that are right in front of you if you're not telling them?
You can't wait. They're not gonna let you wait.
Okay.
Some won't let you in the house. I'll give you 2 quick experiences real quick. One, I had a lady whose husband hung himself on oil rigs. And he worked for a contractor who was with the oil rigs. So myself and another officer went out there, his company boss, and their, I guess you call it HR person, went out there with them. So we got 4 of us standing out there. We go up to the house, it's a small trailer, and it's got a real deep ditch right in front of it. The yard hadn't been mowed in 2 or 3 weeks. It's a mess, it's not clean at all. A lady is there unloading groceries. It's the wife of the man that killed himself. And so, one, I had to be sure he killed himself. I checked the Coast Guard before we go out there and say that, because he may not have. You sure don't want to do that one wrong. But he had. So she's there, and she realizes something's wrong. I said, "Ma'am, can we talk inside a minute?" Now, to go inside, I'm on one side of the ditch. Ditch is probably about as wide as this table, but it's deep. And I said, "Can we go inside?" I'd had to walk around and go over a little walkway to get into her house in the ditch. She said, "No, you tell me here." I said, "No, ma'am, I need to go inside with you." She says, "No, sir, I'm not going. You're going to tell me right here, right now." Now, what do you do? Okay, I mean, you're standing there with her, you're out in the front yard, you don't know how she's gonna react. Sometimes they do try to shoot the messenger. You know, so what do? You know, and here's one thing, now, this comes from having been a police officer, okay? It doesn't come from chaplaincy so much as it comes from being a police officer, but the thought's still good. I told her finally, I said, "Ma'am," I said, "do you really want all the neighbors out here knowing your business?" She says, "No." I said, "Then I'm not gonna tell you until we go in the house." "You're not gonna tell me?" I said, "No, ma'am. I know I'm fixing to tell her husband not only died, but he committed suicide. These are 2 bad things. But I'm not gonna tell her out there in the yard." "Okay." Went inside, sat down. She also had an autistic son that was about 21 years old that was helping her unload groceries, and he never stopped. He just kept unloading groceries. And I know he knew what was going on, but how much it registered with him, I don't know. He was in bad shape. But when she looked at me and said, "How did he die?" I had to say self-inflicted, you know, and that's tough. But you're not gonna get somebody to sit there and wait for everybody to show up.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. I mean, reality,
I'm
that may be a
sure.
good scenario, but reality, it just doesn't happen. You know, I asked officers this sometimes on death notification. I said, "You go to the door, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, a man has been killed, however, doesn't really matter, just, if it's her wife and kids, or wife there anyway." So you knock on the door, she comes, she got a robe on, she got out of bed, 3 o'clock in the morning, she comes to it, and you ask her if you can come in and sit down and talk to her a minute. She said, "Yeah." You go in and sit down, and you tell her that her husband's been killed. And you have to use the words killed or died. Now, don't try to say he's passed, don't try to say he's not here any longer. Killed or died. Get it, it's hard, but get it out of the way first. But in the process of doing that, she looks at you a minute, she has not said a word the whole time. And she gets up and she goes into her bedroom and closes the door. And I look at the officers and I ask them, "What do you do?" Now, they know the danger that's there. One guy said, "Well, I go up and just bust right on in." I said, "Well, what if you did? And she's taking the robe off, she's just getting dressed, changing clothes. That's all she's doing. You just walked in on her. Uh-oh, ain't good. What if you walk in and she's just going to wake her child and tell them. What if she's just crying for a moment? You don't know these things, but you cannot let them stay in that room by themselves. They could very well come out with a shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or should they go in there to do the same thing?
So you can hear a gun go off while she's in the room. That's very possible. So when you think about every scenario is different. Every scenario is different. But you got to realize their brain just stops when you tell them something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've got 3 girls. You know, y'all know Joy. She's my oldest. You know, I cannot imagine what it must be like to have somebody come and tell me that one of my daughters has been killed or dead or died, whatever. Or my wife. I've been there too many times. I've tried to imagine it, it just doesn't come. So I don't know what I do, and they don't know what they do. But you just stop their brain for a few minutes. It went on pause, and they're not going to. You may have to tell them the same thing 14 times about whatever it is they need, the information they need. Coroner's coming. We're going to do. What did you say was going to happen again? Why? Because their brain has stopped. You know, and write down some of the things you do. I don't know what the course taught you, but one of the things I always encourage them to do is if you're going to, you need me to make a phone call for you. And if you do that, fine, you can do that. But if not, then at least write down the number, who you called. Write down the phone number so you can say, well, this one was called. We did. Well, I got to get hold of Aunt Josie. Aunt Josie's already been called. 10 minutes later, did anybody notify Aunt Josie? Aunt Josie's been called. It's not, I mean, she's a sharp lady, but now her brain's on pause. So when you go in there and know that, and you got kids that are gonna have, oh my goodness, kids kind of different way. If it's junior high and under, I don't tell them why the kids are in the presence. And that's why you take 2 officers, by the way. And if you do male and female, it's wonderful. You can't always do that. But if the female's there, you can take them and do that. I had a man that hung himself in a tree out in front of the house, and we got there and we talked to Mom. He was there. My wife happened to be with me. She just took him, went on in the back bedroom, and we could talk a little bit. But you don't do that in front of little kids. That's a different story how you tell little kids that. But now if Mom and them come and sitting on the knee and just won't do anything else, you, like I say, everything's different, guys. We can spend the night here talking about death notifications, things I've done wrong and things I've done right.
Have you ever, or as a chaplain, do you ever find yourself in a position where, like, something bad has just happened and he's been told, you know, he has to come in your office and speak with you, and you're having to make, maybe you're not making the judgment call, but you're sitting down with him to decide whether to refer him to somebody that might take him out of service because they feel like he might be unfit to continue serving at the moment. And if that's true, and they're going in already kind of feeling that that's what this is about, maybe, like, how do you even get them open up to you and not, or try to not lie, you know what I mean, where you can even make an assessment in that situation?
Remember this, when you're talking to somebody, this is any counseling situation, no matter what, and they come to you and say something, now this is confidential, right? Yes, except for, if you committed a crime, you're fixing to tell me about that, or you're gonna hurt somebody or hurt yourself. Those things are not confidential. In law enforcement, now you may be somewhere else, another setting where they've committed crime, you don't say anything, but in law enforcement, you have to.
Right.
You have to, but you don't, but those, anything else is wrong.
We learned that.
Yeah.
Those were our 3 exceptions.
Yeah,
National security,
Yeah.
harm yourself or harm others.
yeah.
They didn't
Well, national
say-
security is committed a crime too,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
Right, you're absolutely right.
You were talking earlier about, one of the first things, instances that you were talking about was, what you do when you see that officer all choked up and, you know, upset about what he's witnessed. The first thing that came to my mind is I want to give him a hug. You know, and I know in that situation that wouldn't be appropriate, but that's in my heart,
Kathy,
that is what,
it might be appropriate.
okay.
It might be. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. Thank goodness I have never experienced this personally. After a long time in law enforcement, I've been proud that I haven't. But an officer shoots somebody. Okay? Everybody there, I mean from the chief, sheriff on down, they're out there. At first, he's trying to justify what he's done. He knows, man, it's not a good thing. It may have been a good shoot,
Right.
but for him, and then he realizes, I just killed a person.
Right.
You know, and what does he do? And you watch him a little bit. You've got to be careful that you don't interfere with the hierarchy of the department doing things. But remember this, that if he talks to you as a chaplain, he can tell you anything he wants to, and it does not go back to court. But if he talks to somebody else, it goes to court. whatever he said at that particular time. So he just, I've seen them where they've stood by the front of a car, and you know, the guy just sitting there like this, you know. If it's a female chaplain, or even a male chaplain, it really don't matter. Going to give them a hug is not a bad thing.
Okay.
Now, you don't stay hugged. You know?
No.
But at the same time, by the way, holds true with the death notification. I had a lady come up one day and said to me, can I just get a hug? She just needed somebody to hug her. Now guys, let me tell you, there is a way to hug and a way not to hug. Sideways, exactly, sideways. Just do that sideways. Now, sometimes you don't have any option because the girl just, you know, they just do it. They're not thinking all those things, but if you are there and they need a hug, that's sideways is the best way to do it. That holds true in church. I mean, I'm a pastor, I'm a huggy person. you know?
Pastor West is a just
Yeah,
that
yeah,
one.
he hug everybody to the side. I hug a lot of people from the side. I can hug my
Doing
daughter
this
from the
most of
side.
the time
you know?
now.
So,
I can't imagine though, being a police officer, or even an EMT, working in that field and seeing some of the things that you see day in and day out. I mean, I've got a friend that works as guardian ad litem, and she just recently got a case of a 1.5-month-old baby that just turned 2 months old that has shaken baby syndrome. Gonna have brain damage and a broken leg, and it's like, my heart breaks just hearing that. So I can't imagine a police officer going in and seeing that day in and day out, you know, what it does to you. I mean, I just can't imagine it.
you know, it is tough. Thank goodness they don't sit every day, but they sit a lot of times, more than once, a lot of times. And there comes periods of time, especially when you have a hurricane come through, Katrina. Oh, the number of people they found dead in homes and stuff that were going through that. And these guys, a lot of them just left off, they left everything, they just walked away.
Wow.
And you'll find some of these officers want to do the same thing. Now, you've also got another situation where you want to pay attention to an officer, and it's happening today as well. But remember back several years ago when Baton Rouge and Dallas, Texas had all those police officers shot and killed, and everybody was trying to support law enforcement.
Yep.
Before they said defund the police, they support law enforcement. You know, I actually had officers that had been around for 10, 15 years come up to me and talk to me and says, "Yep, I'm thinking seriously about quitting. My wife just can't hardly stand it when I leave anymore." Their wife don't know if they're gonna see them that night or not. They just don't. I mean, you go to a lot of jobs, and there's a lot of dangerous jobs out there besides law enforcement, but law enforcement's one of those things that there's a good chance it may not, they may not come home again, you know. And so, and kids think of that too. They, especially junior high and up, they begin to think about that. I'm not gonna see my daddy, you know. And so you call them sometimes when they went to get his son out to go early, they were gonna surprise him with something. He's going to the dentist, and so they were gonna surprise him with something early, so they came early, and they called him out of the classroom, and he wouldn't go. And they said, "Your mom's up at the room, they want you to go." And he finally went up there and was crying. Then he saw his dad, he just ran up there and just grabbed his dad and just hugged him. He thought they were gonna tell him.
Yeah.
So, but guys, I've exhausted my time. And probably y'all's too.
Thank you. Thank you
But
so
I
much.
certainly
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me do this, and this was more of a conversation of different types of things, but I want you to get an inside look into law enforcement chaplaincy as much as anything else. It's not just being there with them after it happens, it's being there when it happens. So if it happens to them, guess who else it happens to? You need somebody to talk to. You need somebody to talk to. Other chaplains are great. They're great for that. All right, Mike, thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I
Thank
enjoyed
you
it.
so much.
I enjoyed it.
You did perfect too.
Yes. Look at that.
Right on time, huh?
Yep.
All right, guys, y'all have a good evening.
Be safe going home.
Oh, thank you.
I just get mail.
I guess we'll be back at 7 because they're fixing it.
Yeah.
You guys didn't have any questions in there? We didn't hear you. Were you able to?
I didn't have any.
Were you guys able to hear him?
Yeah, I heard him.
It was really good, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Amen.